my face is all like starting to ooze because of the rash from hitting my face on the ice. And I got a little bit of a black eye because I smashed my goggles. And I just remember my coach kind of like looking down the end of the bench and me looking back at him, and he just shaking his head of like, I can't believe you are a part of my staff.
I'm Billy Ryan, and this is the No One Is Watching podcast, where we explore high-performing teams, individuals, and leaders, and dig deep to find out what makes them tick. This show highlights the DNA shared by elite performers, the process by which they leverage that talent, and ultimately helps you apply those lessons to your own life, business, or team. All right, what did you want to be when you grew up, when you were a kid?
Honestly, a pro snowboarder was the first thing that I wanted to do. I grew up the youngest of 5 kids and trying to keep up with my older brothers. We were
all brothers or brothers and sisters?
I had one sister in the middle, and she was a bulldog.
She had no choice.
And honestly, it was kind of an interesting, my parents were just working class people and owned an auto body shop, and my mother was the bookkeeper. And we all played sports growing up, and we all took winter vacations. And so I grew up skiing at a young age, and then kind of snowboarding flourished on the East Coast. And I bought my first snowboard in 1989. I'll never forget it. And that's all I wanted to do was just snowboard and compete and be a pro snowboarder. And unfortunately, it didn't work out. But
were you any good?
I was good. I competed. I think, it's definitely one of the biggest things that I strive and to keep in shape for. And it's something that it's one of the things that I do in my life that just gives me 100% pure joy. Like, you have to be 100% present. I still am like a kid going through the park. A little bit of a self plug here. I went through the park at Mammoth last year, and this little kid came up to me afterwards, and he was probably 8 years old, and said, "That was awesome. Do you have an Instagram?" And I've never been so happy that my girlfriend heard that, because it was I was really stoked that I still had it at 46 years old.
And did you give him your MySpace account at that point?
Yeah, exactly. He had no idea what that was. It was perfect. So,
that's great. Did you ever get like a bad injury?
No. I remember I've smashed myself a few times. I was working at the University of Portland, and one of my dreams was a big decision to go there was that I also had the opportunity. It was a great opportunity from the professional side of things, but it was also an hour from Mount Hood, and Mount Hood is a mecca for snowboarding. It's a volcano.
That's a bit of a jump from the East Coast, Massachusetts.
Like, I grew up and being like reading in the magazines of like summer camp on Mount Hood, and just asking my mother over and over again if I could go. So anyways, I went to University of Portland, and I would basically ride probably 40 to 50 days a year. And I would compete, and I would do everything. And oftentimes I was working basketball, and we'd have a basketball game at 7:00 on a Saturday night. And so I would drive up to the mountain first thing. I would get first chair, and I would just snowboard in the snowboard park the entire day. Well, a rail had other plans for me, and I absolutely face planted on a rail. And I'm literally like driving home. I shower up, and all of a sudden my face is just starting to swell. And I have to sit at the end of a bench of a Division I basketball game going on, and it looks like I'm in a bar fight. Like, my face is all like starting to ooze because of the rash from hitting my face on the ice. And I got a little bit of a black eye because I smashed my goggles. And I just remember my coach kind of like looking down the end of the bench and me looking back at him, and he just shaking his head of like, I can't believe you are a part of my staff. But
that's so good.
I also feel like the guys could relate to that, because I was trying to get better and competing at the time, and just really loved doing it. So
that's your story anyway. That's how you got the black eye.
Exactly.
So that's when you and I crossed paths, when you were in Portland, and we were just talking about this a minute ago, sort of the transition from the college environment to professional baseball. People hear that at a first blush, and they probably think it's a a step up, but some sort of a linear move. But what they may not realize is when you're in college, and I want to hear your, sort of background on this, your backstory, but you're very much a generalist, right? You are supporting multiple teams, right? From completely different types of sports, right? And different types of athletes. And then you go to baseball, which in my opinion is one of, if not the, most specialized when it comes to sort of the intricacies of sort of execution. The general athletic principles, are consistent, but it's a much more nuanced sport than some others. So like, what was that like for you, that shift from broader generalist skill set to, baseball only?
Yeah, I think it was interesting. Looking at most people, they were always in the minor leagues and they had only worked with baseball. And so, coming from the college sector, this is 10 years ago now, I spent 16 years essentially in the minor leagues. And during that time, working with, men's and women's soccer, national level men's and women's soccer players, working with collegiate baseball teams, working with basketball teams, talking about navigating and talking to 16 different head coaches who all think that their program is important, and it is, to being able to navigate yourself as a professional of, okay, golf walks through the door. How do you write a program for them? How do you change your voice, your tone, your execution, your coaching style to suit the development of that athlete? To then men's basketball walks in and you've got a completely different turn of events of how you're going to change and manage those guys. To then baseball comes in, and then the intricacies between, position players and pitchers and the schedule and how that operates. I look at it was, I learned how to develop energy systems. I learned how to develop power and strength and kind of all these different athletes. I learned about the shoulder because I had to work with swimmers. I had to work with volleyball players. I had softball. I had baseball. So you kind of start to learn and build out all of these different programs across 16 years. And then you learn a lot about yourself as a coach because you start to believe in, okay, these are my principles. Where are these principles universal across athletic development? Where are these communication styles universal across dealing with coaches, administrators, boosters, parents, younger athletes, developing a staff? I think all of that stuff helped kind of groom me for making that shift into the Major League Baseball. And then also too, staying open-minded and curious was a big thing that I think allowed me to not have an easy transition but it gave me the patience to have a transition that when I did go in, I had to remind myself that I had been at the University of Portland for 9 years. And I couldn't just take those same principles and turn around and apply them at the same time and manner um, at the Atlanta Braves. I always say you're hired for change, but the magnitude and the rate of change determines how long you actually stay with that organization. If you come in and you start, not taking the time to develop relationships, not taking the time to kind of reflect on where things are and appreciate the people who have been there, then I feel like you're going to get off on the bad foot, and it's going to be really challenging to ultimately develop relationship with the players and the staff and kind of where you need to go collectively as an organization.
Sure. What do you think carried over the easiest for you from that generalist skill set to baseball? And then the flip side of that, what was the biggest surprise? What was the biggest area where you're like, whoa, this is different?
Yeah. I think one, we kind of alluded to it earlier, is just character. Like, come in and be a good person. Like, see where you can find solutions and where you can help, but in a way that is complementary to what is already being done. I think once you complement what's being done and you recognize and award the people of like, hey, that's a really awesome idea, let's roll with that, or how can I help? I think that those words right there of how can I help you, both as a front office person and as a player, once you do that, then all of a sudden doors start to open up and people start to let their guard down. And now you've got an entry point. Hey, what's worked really well for you when I was working with the players? What's worked well for you? Let's roll with that. Cool. What do you want to do today? Awesome. This has worked great. Let's keep that going. And next thing you know, a month later, you're probably writing his program for him, and he doesn't realize that it happened. But in order to kind of start that process, just be a good person, come in, be willing to have the conversations and get to know people is a big thing. I would say one of the challenges, the biggest challenges, was where I came from. Vulnerability was a strength because the department that I had built, we were very secure in ourselves about asking for help. And when I first came in, I'll never forget kind of looking at it and saying like, hey, if there's something I'm not doing well, let me know. I'll change. And it was almost people then latched onto that, and that thing became a target.
You opened the door for them.
Of you don't know what you're doing, so we are going to put the target on your back because you are not qualified, because we, in essence, are threatened by you is the thing that it was. So I think vulnerability is a strength and still can be a strength, but also know the environment of which you're operating around. And professional sports is, as in college sports, sports in general, it's a very, cutthroat business. And you look at, from a head strength coach perspective, there's only 30 teams in Major League Baseball. That's a very coveted spot. And you can see why the character of people will start to come out when they feel threatened. And you can notice that 100%.
Yeah.
But I think if you are true to who you are, and you are a good person and you bring good value to the organization, then you'll start to see that those people eventually don't last very long.
Yeah, I would agree. I mean, I think that there's unquestionably people that have been successful boxing out and isolating, from a self-preservation mode, but it's awfully hard to do. It's exhausting, and I think it's a little bit of a zero-sum game where you're trying to make sure you come out on top. And you came in, we were talking a little bit about this earlier, at an interesting inflection point in Atlanta where there were a lot of changes going on. And you were one of the significant ones, but you were not the only one. There were a lot of sort of sweeping organizational adjustments happening. So that things had worked there for a really long time, and there were some really good people. It was just time for change, right? It was an evolution. And so there's a lot of reasons why people fear change. People don't like it. But particularly when, someone shows up that, is acting a little bit like a mirror to the other person, saying, hey, here's, you start realizing maybe what you don't know. You're realizing some of your blind spots. And part of the reason that, we wanted to bring you on board when we did was that I was always trying to build teams. You know what I mean? I was never trying to go sign the biggest name free agent we could, right? Or go get this one player or one person, because ultimately the team's going to dictate how successful you are. So you have people that, have that DNA of being part of a team and building something, then eventually that team, binds together. That team gets better together. The individual components of that team make each other stronger. But inevitably it's rocky. It's uncomfortable initially getting there, right?
100%. I think like when you come into the org, to your point, it was a really interesting time, right? We were going from kind of the old Fulton County Stadium and then moving into Truist Park, so from 16 to 17, there was that. It was kind of an interesting point. In 16, I feel like we were trying not to lose 100 games. And then next thing you know, but we had, our farm system was stacked. And then kind of that evolution of moving through and then moving out of Disney and moving into the new spring training facility. And there was a lot of both facilities that were driving the bus and then players and staff and everybody else that was involved in that point,
Yeah, and that was the fun part for me was that time. I mean, it was horrible in a lot of ways because you're staving off triple digit losses, which is hard on everybody. But you were collectively, we were building something special, and obviously, rightfully so, a lot of attention gets paid to the product, quote unquote, that gets put on the field, right? The player acquisitions, whether they're major league players or kids in A-ball or kids that are just drafted out of high school, that gets 95% of the attention, but there was really an organizational overhaul going on, sort of, roof to foundation, to build something sustainably excellent. And that is a big endeavor, and it takes a lot of good people to do it, And so, in a, I guess, a serendipitous way, you came in at the perfect time because you had that chance to put your thumbprint on that and to build at a time where, winning the division was not realistically our goal or the expectation, right? It was really the building of something that would ultimately turn out to be not that far down the road, resulted in a championship, that you played a significant part of. So that's what I nerded out on at the time. That's why I still get geeked up about getting that chance to do it from like day one and align yourself with the right people and build something special and see how good you are. Right.
Yeah, 100%. I think, and to stay the course in a long-term vision in a results now oriented type of profession is really challenging to do, because the fan base, they want to win now. They don't understand that, if we just continue the vision of where we're going, getting the right players, getting the right staff, getting everything kind of overhauled and heading in the right direction, that it's kind of like you got to water the garden, right? We planted all these really good seeds and we got all these people together. And now you need to basically continue to invest in them. And that they're going to flourish. It's just going to happen a little bit further down the line, maybe than people would have expected. But, obviously it grew into something amazing. And to be a part of that, having played such a small part of it, but be a part of it was just something that was one of the most rewarding parts of my career, honestly.
Yeah, that's why everybody does it. Right? To be a part of something special, be a part of something bigger than themselves, and to win. It's about winning. You want to do it the right way. You want to, sort of follow a path in that pursuit, but ultimately it's about winning. You talked a little bit about you're a pretty understated, humble person, and you're a curious person. All of which were reasons why I was excited to, bring you on board 10 years ago. And all those traits have served you well, but you talked a little bit about sort of humbling yourself before the staff and to some extent the players as well. Right. And I think if you do that initially and then you follow that up with competence, you prove yourself, you earn that credibility and that trust. What was that process like for you early coming in from a college athletic program on the other side of the country where you really didn't know anybody? You knew, I think, maybe one person in the organization. So you had a steep learning curve in a lot of ways. You knew your functional area of expertise, but there was a lot of other stuff flying around that you were seeing for the first time in a somewhat of a tumultuous period of the organization you were joining. So walk me through what that felt like for you, what you learned from that experience, and how you kind of came through the other side of it.
Yeah, I think it was interesting. Coming into it, I got a chance to spend a lot of time kind of in this hybrid role where I was the massage therapist, kind of helping return to play, helping out with strength and conditioning. So it gave me an avenue where I was mentored by the gentleman who hired me, Andrew Hauser, kind of to navigate kind of the waters of professional baseball. And then also I got to spend time outside of the weight room and build time. When you think about when you work on a guy a little bit more through massage, you can have some different conversations with people. And then when you're starting to rehab guys and kind of seeing that evolution, guys now a little bit more one-on-one, you start to kind of get a pulse on how they're working, what baseball is really like, what the demands of the sport are really like over 162 games, what spring training is going to be like, and how that lends itself into the rest of the season. So there was that aspect of the mentorship, kind of spending time as this Swiss Army knife, kind of being able to flow back and forth between the training room, the weight room, out on the field. It allowed me to kind of sit back and kind of watch and learn, which I felt helped set me up for the following year as I kind of then went into the head strength coach role and we hired some other people, and next thing you know, things start to snowball and really take hold. And there were some key players that I think I was able to build relationships with early on, and they really helped to kind of vouch for me. It was like all of a sudden, next thing you know, it was like, okay, hey, he's working with this guy, and oh, wait, what's he doing? And then next thing you know, things start to snowball and take over from there. So that was a really big part of it, was just like, who matters? How do I impact as many people as possible? How do I be as authentic as possible as well? I think that's another thing. Like, be you. Um, and when I was authentic coming into it, I was also kind of leading by example. It's, I think, for myself, when guys are watching you and doing your own workouts and they're coming in early and you just finished doing your workout, I think some of that stuff now starts to build credibility, because not only are you asking people to do things, but you're walking the walk. Um, and then next thing you know, people start to say, "Hey, what are you doing? I'm working on this." And then you start to find avenues of which you can provide value to that particular person. And then eventually it just becomes a snowball effect throughout the organization.
Yeah, part of the reason I always enjoyed kind of lingering in the weight room and the clubhouse and the training room um, was really like the impetus behind this whole project for me is of no one is watching, right? That is when the real magic happens. That's when you guys get to know the real player. I always knew if the assistant GM walked into the training room, you were going to get one version of the truth from the players, right? And understandably so. And you're going to get a slightly different version of it when you're working on a guy on the table who's recovering from injury, or he just threw 8 innings or whatever it may be. But coming in and seeing the work that went in behind the scenes, I mean, what you do professionally, and the professionals in that field, I just have a tremendous amount of respect for, because there's so much work that goes into it. And, 99.9% of it goes unseen from the rest of the world. But, the 40 odd people that are buzzing around that clubhouse, they see it every day. It emanates out from that. And to your point about kind of getting your street cred, right? All it takes is one player with some credibility and some gravitas in the clubhouse that trusts you. And then other guys are looking over and say, well, I mean, he trusts him, right? He's doing, I'll give him a shot, kind of thing. And then you just got to prove yourself over and over and over again. And then all of a sudden you're rolling.
Yeah, 100%. I think, one of the best compliments you can get working in a clubhouse is you're the same guy every day, which is really hard to do.
Yeah.
Sometimes you wake up and you're like, man, I feel absolutely terrible today. We've had, we're on the end of a 10-day road trip, but it doesn't matter. What matters is that you are really passionate about helping people. And I always say, like, I have to take care of myself first. So I have to win my morning. If I win my morning, then I can help other people win their day as well. And so part of that self-care, part of that self-discipline, doing the things that I really enjoy doing in the morning, that helps make me the same person every day. So when I showed up to the clubhouse, I'm ready to go and put my best foot forward. And therefore, I feel like that literally just starts to transcend and ripple into the rest of the clubhouse.
Did winning the morning for you look different 15 years ago, when you were in college, or has it been the same routine for you?
I think part of it was college was a different beast because you had teams at 6 a.m. I look at kind of college taught me what work is, in the sense of you have a team at 6 a.m. and then you have a basketball game at 6 or 7 p.m. that night. Or you're teaching. I'll never forget, my Mondays were terrible because I had a team at 6 a.m. and I had to teach a 3-hour kinesiology class on a Monday night from 7 to 10, and so it's like, boom, Monday's a 15-hour day, and then you got to come back the next day on Tuesday and you still have to kind of be the same person every day. So what did winning the day look like? For me, I always feel like my personal health and wellness is how I continue to learn. And if I invest in myself, then that naturally transcends to what I'm doing with the players. And so when I look at it in baseball, you're normally getting to the ballpark around noon and you're leaving between 11 and midnight. So if you get up and you kind of get to bed, but I try to get up early. I try to kind of outline what is my morning going to look like, plan ahead, and I train every single day, and I make that a priority. And it doesn't matter where we are, I find a way to get it done, whether it's in season or off season. But that is what helps to build my confidence. That's what helps to build kind of my skill set as well as I'm trying new things that I've read about or that I'm continuing to learn and apply. And if I can apply those same things to myself, then I know I'm going to be a better coach, so on and so forth down the line. So um, to answer your question, yes, it looked a little bit different in college, but I also used to train with my teams in college. There were certain things that we did that, hey, we're going to do this conditioning session. It is absolutely going to suck, but we are going to do it together. And next thing you know, you're running sprints with your basketball team and you're 35 years old and you're doing suicides right alongside of them. They look over and you've got credibility. I'll never forget, we were doing some type of leadership training in men's basketball. They brought in this particular, they were former ex-military guys, and they were going to do some team leadership building. And I was the only coach that went through the entire course with these guys and the last aspect of it. And I'll never forget, I literally got done, I don't know how many burpees and everything else we did. And then ran, I was like, hey guys, got to run. I got volleyball here in 5 minutes. And
Yeah.
You coach volleyball and you got grass all over you. But you know what? That's the right thing to do. And I think, when we are working with our players now, we are running conditioning. We are doing sprints with these guys. We are doing some agility work with them. We are leading by example. And I think that just continues to show that you can do it. And then it starts to build that camaraderie. You run a sprint with a guy and you run to show him, and then you kind of watch him come through, and then you walk back, and now you have a conversation. And now you can be like, hey, this is what I've seen, this is what you're doing. How are you doing? What's your heart rate? Mine's this. Okay, cool. It starts to develop the pacing and all that. So I think all that helps to develop kind of like same guy every day, And what does that look like for me to win the morning and win the day with the guy?
Well, it also proves to everybody that sees that you're in it, that you're engaged, that you care, that you're willing to kind of get your hands dirty. We did some stuff in Atlanta several years back now, and some of the guys on your team, the performance team, wound up doing it in subsequent years. But I went through similar experience where we put these guys through a little bit of a gauntlet, and you could see it in their eyes. They wanted to just tap out. Like they wanted no part of this. And they looked over and they see, my broken down unit, schlepping down the road. And they're like, I can't quit. This guy's doing it,
Yeah.
So
Exactly.
there's an element of just shaming you, peer shaming, where you're like, this isn't that hard if he's doing it, so here we go. And it does give you that credibility on the front end of okay, I'm going to drag you through the finish line, right? To get you through this drill or this exercise. But after that, having gone through shared experiences, you're like, now you can, to your point, now you're walking back to the next sprint. It's a very different conversation than if it's like police academy and you're in the golf cart with the whistle and the megaphone, blowing it at them. It's a little different dynamic.
It totally is. And then you can start to now guys, it's like, hey, we're going out at, this such and such a time. Who wants to come? And next thing you know, you got 3 or 4 different guys coming out and they're running sprints. And we're kind of going through a little bit of a workout. And that makes a big difference, for kind of lightening the mood and getting everybody going and making sure that we're getting people in a position to be the best version of themselves, both on and off the field. And when the lights go on at 7:00, they're ready to bang. And that's the biggest thing. It's like when you come into the weight room, it doesn't matter how you feel. You should feel better and more energy when you leave because you got a game. And that's where we're trying to get you, and I need to be able to adjust and adapt just as much as you do too,
What have you learned from, I had Sned on a while back, and one of the things I love that he shared, he's been around the game forever, and he's got, he's old enough to be some of these kids' grandfathers, and, he's like, I learned something from players every day, and so talked about your routine, right, and the physical demands of your job versus that of a player and what you need to do to win your morning, to get ready, to do your best. What have you seen, whether it's specific or general, practices or habits from guys that are elite performers in baseball that you've, maybe stolen a thing or two from?
Yeah, I would say, I think kind of quoting Snit on this is like they're boring pros. You can literally know exactly where they are in the clubhouse at any single time, regardless of what their stats say. They're the same person every day. They stay true to the process of what they're doing. And I think one of the challenges is they never get too high and they never get too low because they know the game is going to humble them at any moment in time because it's a vicious game. It's an incredibly hard and difficult game. And so those guys that are able to just, they stay locked in. They're also like, they have a sense of humor to them as well, right? They kind of like have a way of holding each other accountable, but they hold themselves accountable. But there's a little bit of humor and banter, and the banter kind of keeps the mundane things going. But they just literally are beautiful at doing the basics, And I would say, like, do simple better. Like, just stick to the plan. It doesn't have to be this really ornate thing. Just boom, you're locked in and just get your process done and have that self-discipline and a little bit of grace based upon where the day's at, but also don't let yourself off the hook. I think that's where.
Well, it's, being great at something is boring. It is boring because it's all the stuff that happens when nobody's looking that gets you to that point and that sustains that level, and it's not fun, right? It's not, working out when it's dark out or eating, being super disciplined with your diet or going to bed really early or, the recovery, all this, nobody likes doing that stuff. It's much easier to say, I'm going to be super disciplined for 3 days and then I'm just going to blow it out, right? I'm going to eat whatever I want, or I'm going to stay up late and play video games. Like the guys that, to your point, it's a discipline of being disciplined, but it's a discipline that every single day they're just going to go do it. And I think you're right. I mean, part of I'm as a former college baseball player biased, but like baseball teams generally have personality. There's a lot of downtime. There's a lot of, there's like 30 minutes of action in a 3-hour window. So you've got to fill that. And if there is no personality, it's going to be a long season. Pitchers are notorious for it because there's more downtime there than anywhere, so they've got to fill that void with something and make it productive. But it does help. You make a game out of the monotony, and you kind of rib each other in a way that's going to, ultimately make you both better. That's where the good stuff happens. The opposite trajectory is it's becomes backbiting and toxic, and somebody's saying stuff in front of the team because they're gunning for you instead of trying to lift you up.
Yeah, exactly. And you look at the teams that kind of have I reflect back on some of the different teams that we've had, and the ones that we've had a great run, but there's just some teams that were very, very special. You look at that team that won the World Series, and you look at how tight that bullpen was and some of the personalities that were involved there. It was like stand-up comedy hour, but they were like just elite at the banter, but with that, everybody knew that everybody had each other's back. And
they posted when it was time, right?
They did. But you know what? Like everybody has an off night, and they were the first one to turn around and support that guy during that off night and be like, hey man, like, here's what happened. Like, let's get rid of this now so you can decompress. Let's coach you out of this, like get you out of this headspace. So you go home, you sleep it off, and you come in the next day and it's a fresh, clean slate. That type of leadership, that type of, older player that has a lot more experience helping kind of the younger players out. And it didn't really matter what your role was. Your role was a player, and your role was to contribute to the team. And you look at those guys in that particular team in just a couple of years that we've had, and those are the most special. You can tell right off the bat.
Hey, real quick, if you're getting value from the show, do me a favor. Hit that subscribe button, and if you're so inclined, go ahead and leave a 5-star review while you're at it. It helps more people like you find this podcast, and honestly, that simple form of support, it makes a difference. All right, back to the conversation. Well, the veterans know the difference between keeping things light and loose and being a clown. I mean, there are guys, if you don't have that experience, if you haven't seen it either from somebody else or experienced it yourself, some guys may think they're being a leader and keeping the clubhouse loose, but they're acting like a clown, and they're not. It's not productive. It's just kind of look at me, nonsense. But it's almost like comedic timing, knowing when to drop the punchline, knowing when to throw the jab, to keep it loose with an eye toward this guy's scuffling right now. I'm going to crack a joke to make him smile because he needs to smile. That stuff is really good. And I would argue there is probably no way to quantify this, but every championship team, in recent memory has an element of that, because it's not always the most talented team on paper that does it, right? Especially in baseball. That is a gauntlet. 162 games is a lot. And people can't appreciate how much of a grind that is, mentally as much as physically. And so getting through that on the other side of it, every year you look at and you're like, that team's in the World Series. Oh, this team, they got bounced in the first round, or they didn't make the playoffs. Like, it's hard. There's a lot of things that have to line up to get you there. And it's not played on paper, right? Guys got to go out there and do it. And they've got to, persevere through 162. And in your role, I'm curious, especially coming from college, which is a different kind of sort of frenetic energy and workload management. Your job is to get them physically ready every single game, right? Help them optimize their human performance physically. How do you do that over 162 games, right? There's so many ups and downs throughout the year.
Yeah, I think you got to look at it as one, how am I looking at it from a lifestyle perspective? When you talk about, you've got kind of sleep disruptions. So educating the guys on sleep, how sleep is really important. That's going to be a foundation for your recovery, right? You think about, if I have poor sleep, then I generally have poor digestion and metabolic. So my body's not necessarily in the right spot there. When I also look at like mental acuity, that's like, try to be sharp when you're sleep deprived. So it doesn't happen. So kind of that's a major lifestyle factor that we need to kind of adjust and kind of optimize that from that aspect. We look at nutrition. That's another thing, how you feed yourself. And I look at nutrition as obviously the food that you take in, the quality of the nutrition. I look at hydration and water, the quality of the water that you bring in. I look at like light, like do you get up in the morning? Do you get sunlight? Do you get outside? Do you do the things that you need to do? The quality of the light that you're bringing into your body, because all of your cells are off of that as well. And then also, what are you feeding yourself from, like a social media or books, or like what are you feeding yourself from a knowledge perspective? Because that's going to help influence you as well in your day to day, because that's performance, right? And then looking at the physical attributes that you need to look at from, one, are you moving really well? When you come in, the quality of your movement is going to dictate the quality of your execution and skill. And so we want to look at, like, let's build a foundation of health, kind of alluding to like the four things that we talked about earlier that I just mentioned. And then looking at health from a physical aspect, the quality of the tissue, the quality and movement of the joints, the quality of the system as a whole to function collectively for skill expression. So what does that look like? Are we physically fit, from a cardiovascular system standpoint? Can we handle the day? We look at kind of respiration rate. We look at heart rate. We look at HRV and some of the different just telltale signs of where you're at physically. And then putting that collectively into an individualized programs. We alluded to earlier is like each guy has something that works well for them. And the entire goal of physical performance is to come into the weight room and leave feeling better than when you walked in the door. And sometimes when you're lack of sleep, we know that exercise can help counterbalance that. When you're not feeling really good, last thing you want to do is start a workout. The hardest part is getting started. And then like 5 minutes in, you're like, I feel great. Like you just start to break a sweat, the endorphins start to get going. And next thing you know, you're like, all right, let's go. And then you kind of start to break things down. I always think of baseball. We play in 3-game series generally. So the first day of the series, let's get you moving. Let's get you outside. Whether it's a position player, let's make sure that we sprint, that we move. If it's a position player, kind of get ready to go out and throw, do some short sprints, do some medicine ball work. And then day 2, okay, now let's get our lift in. What does that look like? Could be different for every person. Some guys are body weight only. Some guys like to lift heavy. Some guys, kind of like to do a little bit more lighter weights, but more functional movements. Let's just make sure you get it in. And it might only be 20 minutes. It doesn't have to be this giant hour-long thing. Let's just be very consistent. And if we are consistent throughout 162, that is the biggest thing, is being consistent. And then the third day, generally, you got a day game. What do you need from me that day? Some guys, it's like, hey, man, Sunday mornings, let's go outside. And we get outside. It's early. It's a quick turnaround. 10 o'clock, we're outside. We're getting some sunshine. We're doing some sprints, a nice long extended warm-up, get the heart rate up. And that's literally the whole goal of that workout, is just to feel good for when the first pitch at 1:30. So then you just put that on repeat over and over again.
Yeah, right. Like I said, man, super boring. You're talking about digestion and hydration and sleep. It's like, that's boring stuff, but it makes a difference, right?
It makes a massive difference.
Yeah, I feel that. I mean, I when I don't sleep good, I feel awful. I get up every morning at 5, and it is really hard some mornings to get up, and it's the hardest 5 steps of the day, are the first 5 steps out of that bed, and then Once you get out and you get moving, you're like, oh, sometimes it might take 15 minutes some mornings. Sometimes it's 5, but like I am always glad that I did it. I'm never done with a workout, coming back in, it's still dark out with my family still asleep or my kids still asleep, because my wife gets up with me now and does it. And say, man, I wish I hadn't done that, or I don't feel better than I did when I started. 100% of the time.
100%. Like I always say, like the self-discipline and self-respect is breaking that comfort. And when you have to get out of bed early in the morning, that's like, you are the most comfortable you'll ever be.
Yeah.
At 5
It's all downhill from that moment on. Yeah.
Exactly, right? And it's like, you have to literally fight yourself to get out of bed.
Yeah.
And to your point, right? The older we get, it's like, man, those first 5 steps, it sounds like Rice Krispie treats, just snap, crackle, pop, like, right? But then all of a sudden, like, you just start slow and you just got to get in the groove. And then like 5 minutes on a bike, next thing you know, you're like, all right. Like, and then it sets the tone for the rest of the day. And I feel
and look, this is stuff that obviously we're talking about, high performance and elite athletes, but honestly, this is applicable to everybody. I mean, there's a ton of people that travel for work. I used to travel all the time when I was in baseball, travel all the time. And I was home. I'd have a pretty good routine, right? Diet, exercise, sleep, like, well, maybe not sleep, but, I'd have a decent routine. And then inevitably you go on the road and you let off the gas a little bit. It's like, well, I got in late last night, so I got to sleep in this morning, or, I haven't slept in weeks and the kids aren't here, so I don't have to get up. So I'm going to sleep. There's always a reason why. And I used to go from, God, I used to sleep so good in hotels. I'd be like, sleep like the dead. Now I can barely sleep in a hotel, because I'm just like, I got to get up. I just got to figure out what's going on, and the routine's off. So all this stuff about essentially just like get your motor going, force yourself to do it when you're morning, and the day gets easier and you show up. I mean, just from a leadership perspective, you get in a fight with your wife in the morning, or you don't sleep, or what, are you getting to a fender bender on your way to work, and you show up and everybody knows you had a bad morning, that day is all but shot for you and for the entire team, because you're like, well,
100%.
Stay away from him today. He's in a bad mood.
And to your point, like leadership, if I can't lead myself, then how do I expect to lead others? And I always say, like for me, one of my core values is integrity, and be a man of my word to others and do what I say I'm going to do, but most importantly to myself. If I tell myself I'm going to do something, then I need to honor myself with self-respect and get it done. And then you start to literally sit down and articulate what that means and write it out, write down your goals. Or in order for me to win the morning, sometimes I have to win the evening before I go to bed. And that's kind of writing out the to-do list. That's kind of, next thing you know, you just start trimming things that don't matter right? Like
Yeah,
if you ask me, hey,
100%.
did you see that Netflix show? I have no idea what's on Netflix because I don't really watch a lot of TV. You know, if you ask me, did I see that thing on social media? Probably not, because I'm too busy trying to do other things. And if I'm trying to optimize who I am as a person in leading myself, then there's other things that you have to be a little bit uncommon amongst the common.
You got to
And
be
people you
selfish,
look at,
right?
you
You
do
can't just go with the flow of everything because you're not going to be.
100%. And everybody's trying to get your time, right? So I always feel like you need to be selfish in order to be selfless, right? Because if I say a yes to you, it's a no to somebody else. If I start to stack my days up and I say yes to everybody else and I didn't hold space for myself, those are the people that get burnt out. Those are the people that don't perform. Those are the people that, it's 130 games in and they're tapped out. They don't have anything left. And so, and then when you start to manage yourself and you manage your energy, then you can start to manage your time. And then that literally starts to transcend across the board of leadership, you know?
Yeah, that is something
And
that I
that's the
think
biggest
for
thing.
me is that for me that came with age, right? It came with age and some shifts in what my day to day was like. But there's this: you're young, and especially if you're an athlete, there's no fear, there's no thought. You're just going. You're just like charging. But you realize eventually that energy, that willpower, to some extent, discipline, you know, it is a finite resource. You can't just rely on willpower forever. Eventually you're going to have a bad day, or you can't just think you're going to burn it at both ends and not pay the price for that. And so your point about, putting your own oxygen mask on first, I think is a really valuable lesson, because there's this hustle culture. There's this, you know, man, I've been places where people came in and it was like, I think I got about 2 hours of sleep last night. And it was like a badge of honor, instead of like, dude, you may as well got up and shotgun 6 beers this morning, because you are not going to be performing very well, And like,
Yeah.
that was as a young person, that's, especially as like a guy, I think that's hard to buck that. It may be easier now because I think there's more information out there about it, and that information is more readily available. But like, if you're some 23-year-old kid and you're getting involved in investment banking or some hyper competitive environment, it's like you got to be in at 6 and you can't leave until midnight, and that's what we do all day every day. Like, no kidding, the burnout rate's so high, right? Like, is that, and there's almost a sort of special forces badge of honor, mindset to that, when it's like, you guys are just being stupid. You're not. There's no reason to be doing it that way necessarily anymore. There may have been at one point, but you don't. You can bring your computer home with you if you you can do things
Yeah.
a little bit more efficiently.
I agree. And I think like there has to be like this natural balance though. Like you can't be a robot, right? But also I think there's something to like some of those longer days that you do have, you're going to have them, right? Like you have to be able to carve your teeth. You have to be able to fight through some adversity. You have to be able to kind of like, at some point, the job has to get done and you're going to be pulling the later nights. But to your point, there needs to be periods of stress because that stress is really what is an opportunity for as a proving ground to yourself of kind of like, it's just as if you equate it to like a long distance runner or running a marathon for the first time. They never knew they had the capacity to do that, and they had to break through those particular walls. In your professional life, there's going to be some times where you have to be able to break through those walls to see what you're capable of, but it shouldn't be the norm. It shouldn't be the badge of honor that everybody's living by. There should be times within the cycle that you're like, hey, listen, we're going to ratchet down. We've got some big projects, but let's get these things done. And then we're going to kind of sit back a little bit, okay, recover, readjust, then we can have more opportunity to reattack. It's the people that are then it's do that 12, 15-hour day, lack
Forever.
of sleep forever. 10, 15, 20 years go by. And I think now, to your point about age, you're starting to see that. Like you're starting to see like I'll be 47 here in a month and I'm not old, but I'm starting to see like, the cost of lifestyles catch up with people. and you don't see somebody for a couple of years, and then you're like, whoa, like you've aged quite a bit. I know we all
Yeah.
have,
Yeah.
but like you don't mean that in a bad way. It's just like, wow, man, like the beers and the burgers are adding up a little bit. Maybe mix in a walk and kind of like reevaluate where you're at. And that's okay if you want to be that way, but that's just not how I personally choose to live. Because for me, self respect and leadership of myself is like my body and my mind are the vehicle of which I can experience people in the world. And I respect that. So I want to invest in that. And I understand that not everybody is of that mindset, and that's okay, you know? But if
Yeah.
I'm
There's
really
different
working
ways
on,
that like I had an interesting conversation the other day where it's, you and I, because of our experiences, view things through sports. And, in a lot of my coaching work it, it comes from that like ethos and that perspective, but it's not about sports. It's not about physicality. I wrote something recently and the title of it was I Am an Athlete. And it just recently sort of came to this realization for me that I am an athlete. It's got nothing to do with what I can physically do at this point in my life, but it is that foundation of how I view the world and how I approach things. And you're going to punch me in the face and it's going to hurt, but I'm going to come back the next day and I'm going to be ready to go again. I'm going to fail. I'm going to bet on myself. I'm going to know when to lead. I'm going to know when to follow. And all of these things, that's just the prism through which I view things. But it's less about that. And to your point about self-respect and care, it's like, I don't care if you've never lifted a weight in your life or you've never played a sport. That's not what it's about. Maybe you're 300 pounds. Maybe you're, maybe you have all these other things going on in your life. But like, what is important to you, and how do you want to show up? There's everybody's got their stuff, right? They're carrying around this stuff, and some people, that's the physical element is not part of it. They're not important to them. So what is? Okay, so what is and how are you showing up for that, and what are you doing to make sure that you show up for that? It's more for me. It's more about the deliberate nature of it and the thoughtfulness that goes into. I'm committed to X, so I need to make sure that everything behind the X is heading in that direction, one way or the other, directionally.
yeah, I would say, are you offensively adapting or are you defensively drowning? Like I want to live life on the offense because then now that starts to, I can make the moves. I have control over where we're going, where I'm going.
Hard to win a game if you never get the ball, right?
Exactly,
Yeah.
But then if you start to think about a defensive mentality, it's like I'm the victim, I'm the one that's getting beat. Our coaching sucks. You start playing the blame game, and you never take responsibility for your actions. And I think when you look at leadership, right, it's there's going to be, to your point, right, like everyone's an athlete in how you see things, and you have to be able to lead, and you have to be able to follow, and you have to be able to shift these roles and understand what your role is at the particular moment in time in the game, and also what the game is presenting to you in the game of life. Whether it's, hey, we're going to meet with a particular client here, and you have a greater relationship with him. Yes, maybe I'm a little bit higher than you in terms of seniority, but like you're going to lead this one because you're going to work this room better than I am in this particular moment in time. But then that role may shift, and I think that's just kind of like the game of life is something that we need to continue to be offensively adapting and moving, because we're going to have all these different things that come at us both from a personal standpoint, a professional standpoint. But if we have kind of a little bit of a true north of where we're going individually, then we can navigate those types of obstacles that come.
I love that analogy. You view it from a sports perspective of offense versus defense. And if you run the same play or the same three plays every single time, odds are you're eventually going to get stopped, right? Whether it's
Yeah.
basketball or football, eventually the defense is going to figure it out and you're going to be stuck. So that adaptability piece and that's where the really great leaders I've witnessed have been. It's a two-pronged sort of dual layer approach to that adaptability. It is, I know I can score if I shoot the ball right now. But if I score every time, the one time that I can't, or if I'm out that day, nobody else is going to be able to because they haven't had the opportunity. I haven't developed them. I haven't given them that chance. So today I'm going to deliberately take a step back and I'm going to pass instead of shoot. And if he misses the shot, I'm going to be the guy standing in front of the camera saying it was my decision. It was my bad. We lost as a team. That's on me. Right. It's that added layer of accountability where it's not like, okay, hey, it's your thing. Like if this fails, it's your ass. Like I've had that said to me,
Yeah,
on things where you're like, it's
totally.
really like, this is going to move the needle. Just trust me. Okay. I don't see it, but I trust you, but it's your ass if it fails.
Yeah.
That doesn't sound like trusting me.
It doesn't sound like trust, but you also have to, I think, have the faith in yourself, right? When you talked about
100%.
earlier,
Yeah.
like betting on yourself as an athlete, right? There's that kind of sixth sense of like, hey, you know what, coach? Like, give me the ball. I'm the point guard in this situation. I know this guy. I know exactly who to pass to, and I trust in my teammate that collectively, yes, we may fail, but are we failing forward? And that's the biggest thing because there's a little bit of inherent risk. And you look at like with corporations, with strength and conditioning, with anything. I mean, there's a little bit of R&D. R&D is failing forward, research and development. Some of your development and research is leading you down a dead end, but it's not a dead end. It's an answer of what won't work as long as you have the grace to be able to recognize that and then move forward. And I think sometimes when you look at some of the major corporations out there that have these opportunities, these little think tanks, you hear about like, hey, 20% of your work week, work on a project that a little bit of a pet passion project. Those companies are the ones that are creating and changing the world.
Absolutely.
And so when you are working in a college environment, when you're working in a pro environment, when I'm talking to the strength coaches that I get a chance to work with, it's like, hey, what part of this performance piece are you interested in? What are you digging into right now? How are you a subject matter expert for us? Because what you're digging into could help the major league club just as much as is going to help what affiliate you're working with. And so I
Yeah,
think
it's
it's a matter
it's
of,
the
again, to
shower
your
thoughts,
point.
right? Like these light bulb moments that happen when you're in the shower because you're not working on something, or it's when you're falling asleep,
Exactly.
right? You got your notebook right next to your bed, and the really challenging thing in sports, particularly baseball, because the season is so long, is I draw the parallel to like a general contractor or a carpenter who's just a home builder, just a master craftsman who's building a house, and he builds that house and he does such a great job that the next client walks up to him halfway through and says, "Hey, will you build my house when you're done?" Sure. And this guy just goes from house to house to house building houses because he's so good at it. And his business has just sort of happened to him because he's good at what he did, but he didn't actually work on the business, and he'll never be able to scale that business. And he probably hasn't hired, it's just like he hasn't worked on anything. He's just done. And so in baseball, it's 162 plus it's spring training. And if you're lucky, it's the postseason, and like the off season is really short. So your point about the 20% of your week in the think tanks, it happens a little bit in the minor leagues, the fringy prospect who's kind of on the cut line, hey, let's drop this guy down, see if he can throw a sidearm. Can he throw a knuckleball? Has he ever tried catching? Like you have that little mad scientist experiment that goes on in player development. But for the most part, it's really hard to do that in not just professional sports, but anywhere, because it's so results oriented and there's nowhere to hide. And if you take that experiment and it turns into Dr. Frankenstein and blows up in your face, there's a decent chance that you get fired over it at some point. So that's where having that conviction that you're talking about, having that commitment to like, well, screw it. We're going to grow. We're not going to just do what everybody else is doing. So we're going to take the chance, and I'm willing to take that risk because the odds are we will innovate in some way, shape, or form by committing to it. Innovation is not just going to happen to us. Like divine inspiration is a bad strategy. Like you've got to be thoughtful about it and committed to it. And that's hard to, just look at what you do every day. There's plenty to do to fill up your time. It's a matter of like, how disciplined can you be with that time? So then when that's all done, I've still got this 25% left over to go
Yeah.
do whatever I need to do.
And I think that's also like, are you taking care of the 80%? Like on the flip side, because if you are doing your job very well and you're collaborating and building and making sure that your kind of compass is headed north, then that gives you a little bit of latitude And to your point, also being very thoughtful in how you spend that 20%, in that chance that you take, in that little small pilot project that maybe you want to take on, that you're willing and you've vetted through the people in the organization, if you're in professional sports, or your friends and coworkers. How are you kind of then taking that and making sure that you've uh, kind of made sure that that 20% is valuable and going to be valuable in terms of where you're going, from kind of putting that out?
Yeah, 100%. So you've gotten directly and indirectly chances to see, elite performers from sort of a wide range of areas. What's a commonality that you've noticed amongst all of them?
Let's see. I would say consistency. Um, Consistency and doing the little things, right? We talked about earlier, like, they just kind of go about their day being the same person every day. There's a consistency in terms of the aura and the confidence that they have. There's also a consistency um, of work ethic. As soon as you start to kind of let off the gas, then I think things start to break down a little bit. So there's that consistency, but there's also that character. They just treat people very, very well. They treat themselves well in terms of how they take care of themselves. They've got a little bit of charisma, right? Like there's this. You want to do really well for them. I feel like the best leaders are like these guys that, man, it's like you don't want to disappoint them, because the standard that they operate is so high that, like, you don't want to let them down, because they're just such a good dude. They're such a good guy, and they want to do really, really, really well, and they care. And they care about who you are as a person. They care about where you're going as a professional, and they want to be part of your journey. Those are the guys that you just like. They make you step up your game. I've got athletes that I've worked with, and just it's like they make me be a better strength coach, because I don't want to. I want to put my best foot forward for them and give them the best program that I can write. Because if I don't give them the time and capability, or the time that I am capable, the program that I'm capable of giving them, then I'll let them down. I don't want to do that. And so it's also
I think that gets back to what I was talking about earlier, that athlete mentality. I have,
yeah,
when you encounter someone who, it's not about failure, it's about how that failure is processed, and they don't feel bad. They don't carry that with them a little bit, that I let Brad down. It's like, well, I tried, gave it my best, right? Like, it needs to gnaw at you a little bit. You got to be able to flush it
100%.
later pretty quick, but like, it needs to eat at you. And if it doesn't, I don't want you on my team, because you don't really care that much. And so that's one thing that I think applies to any walk of life. If you really care, right? Like, if you are just committed, and it's not about, dying on the cross of whatever company you're working for, or, like in professional sports, it's not even the team that you're working with, like, whatever color polo shirt you're putting on before a game, right? Like, but it's about the team that you're with, like the human beings that you're committing to that. Getting back to the bullpen stories you were telling earlier, right? Like, they were there for each other, and it was hey, I let the team down today. I'm going to get them tomorrow. Don't worry. I got you tomorrow. Right? Like, that stuff is really impactful, really meaningful. And it's obviously pretty tangible in sports, but I think it applies.
It totally does. It totally does.
So if you could teach one principle of performance with respect to like performance leadership, to any manager, any coach, irrespective of industry, like, what would be your lesson? What would be your motto, your mission statement?
Man, my mission statement. I think empowerment, right? Obviously, it's kind of a buzzword, but you have to empower people and trust in people. Like, lift them up, like, invest in them. They are your teammates. I always said, when you're running a department, when I was running, say, in college sports, I had 15 teams, right? But I also had a department. They were my assistant strength coaches, and the people that were a part of that department, they were a team. So you have to invest in your team and develop them. As much as I think, when you look at it, I break it down into three things, like the technical aspect of it. How do you make them be a better strength coach from an X's and O's standpoint? And then from a leadership standpoint, how are you getting them to be a better leader, and manager? Can they manage themselves? What does management look like for them as they're managing their time, their day to day, their home life, their professional life? And then this kind of entrepreneurial aspect of it is, where are they going? Where do they want to go as a professional? So, kind of, how are you helping them fill all three buckets in this that and come back to it. I think about, like, how am I educating them? Because if I educate them and teach them how to think, then they're going to learn how to solve problems and find solutions to things in their life, whether that's a physical aspect of things, whether it's a psychological aspect of things, and how they're kind of going about. So I tend to look at those aspects and just say, like, how do I invest in them collectively as a person? Because if I invest in them as a team and my staff as a team, then collectively we are going to improve. And that's the environment now. Vulnerability becomes a strength. People now starting to, they don't want to disappoint you because they know how much you care about them and that you're physically invested in who they are. When you educate somebody, you empower somebody. You start to then develop a leader.
That you said it like it was one of the first things you said, right? Vulnerability used to be a strength, or it was a strength. It's always a strength, right? It's just a matter of whether it's viewed as a strength or it's viewed as a threat, and that's a function of environment. But that last bucket you touched on when it talks about developing people, which is, what do they want? Where do they want to go? And how can I help them get there? That last one, I don't think people spend enough time on really trying to solve that, because all the other stuff you can say and you can do it decently. I want to develop you. I want you to advance and progress. But really what I'm saying is, I want you to perform in my organization so we succeed and I succeed. And I want you to, progress and grow, meaning I want you to get promoted because you're performing and it's all benefiting me in some way, shape, or form. And then, I just want you to keep sort of matriculating down the road here, because that means we're all doing well. In reality, it might be, get back to the investment bank analogy, I want to be here for 3 years and I'll work 24 hours a day. And then I want to go do something else. I want to leverage this experience and this skill set. And I want to go do my own thing. Okay. Like, let's do that, right? Let's make this a mutually beneficial. We'll squeeze every drop of value out of you in that 3 years, and then you will be very well equipped to go do things. But I think it's actually pouring into that other person from their perspective, having that understanding of what their goals are, and you've been around some people that have done a really remarkable job of that. And I know that you embrace that philosophy too, but I don't think there's like an extra layer there that I think people miss sometimes. It's not just, I want to give you all the support and the tools for you to go execute, because that benefits all of us. But like, what's the 100%. Missing piece that's going to benefit you as an individual and as human in your progression? And you tell me where you want to go. I shouldn't be telling you I shouldn't be telling you where you're going to go or where you should want to go.
Yeah. At the University of Portland, we had a $2,000 budget, right? And I had 3 people that worked with me that were on my team, and we had a bunch of interns. And I always said, you know what, like, you can do an amazing job. I'm going to go into the athletic director. I'm going to go to the front office, whatever it may be, and I'm going to go to bat for you for salary wise. But ultimately, like, some of that's just out of my control. And I always said, I'm not going to rely on my resources, but I'm going to rely on my resourcefulness. And so it taught me that, hey, you know what? We're going to drive down to Oregon State collectively as a staff, and we're going to go down there and meet with their strength and conditioning staff, and we're going to learn from them for the day. Cool. Didn't cost me anything but a tank of gas. Hey, we're going to put on a performance conference. I'm going to use my tax return. As long as I, break even, guess what? We hosted a conference. We got people in. Everyone was educated. Everyone was moving forward. And now there's like an excitement within our staff of where we want to go. When you invest in people, then people will stick around for less of a salary, per se. Not that that's a good thing. I'm not advocating for less salary.
No, I get it. Look, you already signed up in baseball. We already know.
Yeah, but it's like, when people now have like their personality and they're being invested in and educated, now all of a sudden they start to like be energized when they're coming into work, and they're going to be doing the things that you're asking them to do, and everyone's going to move in the same direction, you know. But it's like, as a manager and as a leader, don't always be looking at the resources and or lack thereof. Look at, how do I be resourceful with what I have, and how do I use the power of kind of, you know, it was like, hey, listen, they have an anatomy lab. There's a bunch of cadavers over there. I'm going to reach out to the biology department and see if we can take a field trip over there, and the anatomy professor can walk us through a cadaver. And next thing you know, that didn't cost us anything, but we're on a college campus. Let's do that. Hey, we met with the business school, and we connected with a professor there. Next thing you know, we are, you know, going through a personality test and going through a strengths finder. That was through us, and we started to learn about ourselves. And next thing you know, we're learning how each of us operates and what our operating system looks like individually and then collectively. Well, guess what? We became a stronger staff, and we've transcended it and done that here with the Braves, which is really cool. Again, it's just like those little things of being resourceful, and how do you leverage that resourcefulness for the collective good of the whole?
Yeah. Yeah. And look, the flip side of that is, you know, I don't want to be Pollyannish about it. I've had conversations with people where I'm like, all right, hey, just sort of the one-on-one developmental conversations. You know, what do you want? Trying to figure out what makes you tick, what motivates you. And some people have been very direct. Money. I don't care about the title. I don't, just pay me more money. Okay. Right. So let's map out a path where you can get what you want, and we collectively can get what you want. If you're performing for our organization, well, we should be happy to want to reward you for that, right? It's in the form of a bonus or a raise or whatever it is, right? Align those incentives. And if it's money that motivates people, which, let's be honest, like it's true for a lot of folks, right? Money's important.
Yeah.
A lot of people get into sports and other fields not for the money, for the passion and for the calling of it. But at the end of the day, you don't pay your bills with passion and calling. So money matters. So if it's dollars and cents, let's find a way to align those dollars and cents where you get what you want. If you go out, you got to prove it. I'm not just going to give it to you, but then let's go do that. Right. And then the other stuff, if people are on a college campus, or people are in an athletic department, or people are working on a nonprofit, or any number of other fields, it's not the end all be all. Is probably not, you know, the checkbook. There's other things that they're seeking in their life. And that's a perfect example of it. Like, let's go grow as a team and individually, and we'll find other ways to sort of fill your cup.
Yeah. And I think that's like, again, when you are hiring somebody, you are hiring for culture and character. And does their
100%.
character fit the culture we are trying to develop? And then that,
and you got to know what your culture is too. You got to know what you're hiring for.
Exactly.
Right? You know what you're looking for. If I'm running an investment shop, I'm gonna hire some aggressive, money hungry, like sharks.
Yeah.
I don't want to hire the person that wants to go run a nonprofit to run my investments. Right. I want the 100%. Other kind of person. Right. So you got to know what you're looking for. 100% is okay.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And I think that's where you need to like sit down. And if you are a leader, what do you stand for? If you are a corporation, what is your mission? What is your vision? What are your core values as an organization? Who is coming up with those, and where are they, and how are they being evaluated, and making sure that they are followed in the day-to-day fabric of the culture that you are trying to create. When you look at major corporations, when they start to shift away from those particular core values, and they just become something that's when you walk in on the walls, and maybe they had a leadership change and they haven't reevaluated that, and maybe they didn't hire appropriately towards that, guess what happens? Stock starts to tank. They start to kind of lose their way. Next thing you know, they're trying to reestablish who they are, and they've lost who they are, their identity. And when you know who you are, what you're doing, what problem you're solving in the world, in business, then all those things can kind of fall into place. They're not easy conversations to have. They're tough, and you got to live by it, and you got to continue to go back to it. But that is,
well, it's not that different from what you were talking about earlier, right? Like honoring yourself and your integrity and what you want to be as a man and as a person. It's not just what sounds good, on my LinkedIn, or what can I put on a bumper sticker that's gonna be some company swag. you've got to kind of game theory this a little bit and say, okay, like here's what we've come up with. Here's what we stand for. Here's what our vision or our mission are. Let's play this out a few different ways. If we follow all of these, we check all these boxes and we don't turn a profit. Are we good with that? Hell no. Okay, well, why don't we capture some sort of profitability in this, right? Like that's where this is a for-profit business, right? Or if we're about winning and we're saying that we want to be good stewards, of the brand, and we want to be members of the community, and we want to be equitable, and we want to do all these things. Okay, great. You guys have done all those things. You're in 5th place. Are you happy? No. So you've got to walk through, kind of choose your own adventure and figure out like that's the difference between like a culture and a high performing culture in my mind is the high performing culture aligns what they want to accomplish with the way they want to accomplish it, as opposed to just saying one or the other. Don't tell me you're a hedge fund who's concerned with social good and equality. You're looking to return a profit. That's what you should be doing. That is your job. You can do that with integrity. You can do that with some values, but like, if you're telling me you just want to give back, but you're not happy driving your 10-year-old used car, like, you know what I mean? Like some of these things are just in conflict with one another, and like, just be true to yourself.
Yes, 100%. And keep the goal the goal, And to your point, like if you're turning around and you're creating a culture and you're writing down what your mission and vision is, that has to align with the ultimate goal of being profitable and developing a winning culture. It has to be, or else it's not going to last,
Correct. Yeah. Nobody cares about your culture if you're not winning or if you're not making money. It's just results do matter, unfortunately, for those of us who are, drinking the culture Kool-Aid. It's the last good book you read.
The last good book. Let's see. I
see you scanning right now.
I know. I'm actually reading right now a book called The Mitochondrial Manifesto, which is very interesting regarding mitochondria and kind of how important it is. That's been a good book. Let me look here. I'll tell you.
Put you on the spot.
I know you totally did, but
this is your first answer though is very on brand, because I would always love getting on planes after homestands, going on a road trip, and you'd go in and you'd see, the players would be, if it's after a win, their players would be yucking it up, playing cards in the back or eating or drinking or whatever, and the coaches will be, up front sleeping. And you look back and the performance staff is nose deep in a textbook that's 800 pages.
I would say one book that I read recently that I really enjoyed was Deep Work by Cal Newport.
Yeah, that's a good one.
And when you start looking at like kind of lead measures versus lag measures, and when you look at kind of what he's been able to accomplish and kind of how his frame of mind works, I think, are you existing in your job, or are you kind of actually thriving in your job? And some of that comes down to like, sometimes we just go and exist and we go through the mundane, we check the box of our emails and our projects that we have to get off our plate. But then when you really sit down and you start to get and take a deeper dive into your work, I thought that was a very good, impactful book. I really liked his style of writing.
I like his perspective.
That was a very good book.
I think it's one we need for the times right now, because you can spend all day just trying to clean up your inbox if you want to. You can spend a whole week trying to do it, really. Yeah. And so this notion of like slowing down and doing deep work and being thoughtful, it's harder now than it probably ever has been. I think COVID reignited that. I mean, it did for me. I mean, it forced us to slow down and to think and to be by ourselves, which, I'm certainly not wishing for another pandemic, but there were benefits that came out of that in a lot of ways. But the machine that marches on, right, with technology and all the other stuff, like it's very easy to just kind of get up and go through the motions, and you're just a zombie for 30 years. And you don't even realize it because you're doing what everybody else is doing.
And I think that's where kind of sometimes, it definitely is cliche, right? Like kind of win the morning, those types of things. But when you get up early and there's power in the quiet,
100%.
Getting up, and whether you're sitting with yourself and a cup of coffee and maybe you take 10 minutes to kind of write something down and write in a daily journal, whatever maybe is on your mind, or you're kind of sitting and you have this like dedicated think time where you're undistracted. I think there's a lot of power in that, of self-discovery of who you are as a person, and then also from a deep work perspective of like you just start to kind of develop these little micro habits that kind of transcend who you are as a person.
Yeah, I completely agree. It's the only time, really the only time in my day that I get to choose the stimulus, and whether it's going to be
Yeah.
reading or writing or exercise or anything in between, I have to seek it out, because once the switch is flipped in the morning and it's getting kids ready for school and it's everything, it's just we're on autopilot for much of it, and it's just we're backpedaling, we're playing defense again. So I agree. It's like setting that tone for your day, and even if it's 30 minutes a day, I'm just saying you don't have to get up and exercise. It doesn't have to be a physical endeavor. Get up and meditate. You can
No.
get up and clean the house. You can get up there and I read something online. It's like, I always used to think my dad was crazy. He'd get up at 4 o'clock in the morning and just sit in the dark at the kitchen table. He's like, now I get it. It's just like,
Yeah.
I
Right.
need some time.
Yeah. There's something to it. I think when I kind of shift into off-season mode, there's like a rebuilding that has to take place. When you're in the structure of the season, it's like the season's kind of easy, right? Because it's going so fast. In the off season, sometimes it's actually more challenging because you have to sit with who you are. You have to sit with the things that you've been putting off, whether it's difficult conversations you've had, things, who you are. Like, and there's also this like rewiring. Like, we're in the entertainment industry. There's many late nights. There's all these time zone changes. There's all this stuff that's basically trying to hack your health, both physically and mentally. And so I tend to try to shift, and I'm out here on the West Coast now, and it's like, hey, I'm up. First thing I do is I get up, I go for a walk. No phone, no nothing. 6 a.m. I don't check my phone when I wake up. I just try to get up, out the door. It's dark out, it doesn't matter. Little half-hour walk, come back. Okay, now I can almost start the day because I was a little bit selfish in the morning. And I think with you guys with kids, and it's just it's a real challenge. So I think you either have the beginning in the morning or you have the end of the day, and usually it's just exhausted. At the end of the day, you've got nothing left.
Like I
Like the
said, energy is
battery's
a
done.
finite resource. Yeah.
Yeah. So like, coming back to getting something that is meaningful to you and kind of staying true to that and staying kind of the discipline to that makes it starts to transcend other aspects.
Yeah, I completely agree. This has
How
been
about
fun,
you?
man.
Any other?
Go ahead.
Sorry. Any books that you've read recently?
I've been like a little bit of a glutton for punishment lately. I've been reading although you just told me you were reading the Mitochondrial Manifesto, so this is gonna sound like beach reading to you.
Yeah.
But I read a really beefy Teddy Roosevelt biography a few months back, and then my wife's favorite book is Gone with the Wind, and I've never read it, so I'm like, all right, I'm gonna as my gift to you, I'm going to read this, this American novel, which I don't read a lot of novels, and so it's a little
Yeah.
bit of a grind for me, not because it's a bad book. It's just, it's I'm a sprinter, not a distance runner. And it's
Got it.
but it's good. It forces me to read something that's different. But anything that makes me think, I enjoy. And that's again like I find that I sleep better at night if I'm able to read before I go to bed, even if it's 5 pages, right? Just to kind of get your mind off whatever that day looked like. And I'm usually tanked by the end of the day, and I'm just like, I want to go to sleep anyway. So get me a few pages and call it a day. But yeah, it's I do like Cal Newport stuff because I think it's like a lighthouse in the dark right now in the middle of the ocean with some of this like slow down and think for a second. That didn't used to be as rare as it is now. So I think that because it's more rare, right? Like supply demand, it's more valuable.
Yeah. Exactly.
Brad, I appreciate the time, man. I know you're always super thoughtful about this stuff, and I think that if you tell somebody you're going to go talk to a strength coach or a performance therapist or whatever, they're gonna have one image in their head, right? The kind of like you tell them you're talking to a high school gym teacher, right? You're going to have the stereotype in your head about that too. But like I think that you've proven, as have some others I've talked to, that it's a pretty holistic, thoughtful world out there. And this is about, this is like an F1 driver taking his car to the mechanic. You know what I mean? Like these athletes are entrusting their livelihood to you in a lot of ways. You know, the folks that I've talked to in this space, yourself included, take that responsibility seriously and are always, maybe more so than any other group I've been around in pro sports, always pushing to better themselves. Again, getting back to the same thing of like, take care of yourself first, like better themselves so then they can serve better. So I really appreciate your perspective.
Yeah, no, thank you again for having me on. I appreciate the opportunity. We've had some amazing guests, and I'm humbled to have the opportunity to chat and be a part of the lineup.
Thanks for listening to this episode of the No One Is Watching podcast. If you'd like to support the show, hit the subscribe button, leave a review, and share it with your friends. If you're interested in similar content focused on leadership, culture, and high performance, check out nooneiswatching.com. Your time is valuable, so I appreciate you spending some of it with me today. See you next time.